Okay, thank you, and good evening to everyone. So it has been a very long day, and at least for the European, we have learned a lot about how to use open source in different way. So I'm very happy to close this part with very distinguished speaker, which actually connect very well with what we heard through the day about the grid changing, transforming into a system of systems with a lot of activity happening at the edge of the system, and with microgrids, with communities, and so on. And we're going to talk here about how to try to better integrate this grid edge with the rest of the system and put really the prosumer at the edge of the system, at the center of this future system of system, and not forget about it when we design this future power system of systems. We are still waiting for our colleagues from the Commission to join. Mark von Stiphout, I think he has a bit of technical difficulties with the platform. It has not been so easy to use, I think. Let's hope that he's going to join. Maybe what we can do is start the first step of discussion and presentation with Natalie Samovich, who is going to introduce to us the Alliance for IoT initiative view on how she sees this evolution of the system. So Natalie, you have a few minutes to present your view.
Thank you so much, Laurent. Great to be here. Good topic, and yes, indeed, it's a good follow-up of what we've heard before. So hopefully, we're not going to be repeating ourselves. At AOTI, within the past number of years, we've been closely working on actually unlocking the challenges on the IoT edge continuum, as we call it. Which of course involves the consumer and all the systems at the edge of the grid. So it is a physical edge, and as well as it's the edge of the system. But the edge is gaining more and more relevance and is more and more central because we're moving from the centralized to the decentralized system. I have a couple of slides, so I would like to share my screen. It doesn't allow me to share the application, so I have to bother you with this image first and then go into the application. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, it is not the slide that I have to have. This is what you see on the screen is it's a result of actually joint work and joint paper that we've been working on with NSOE and Energy and Bocconi Sustainability Lab. The paper has been just recently published, so there is a link on the bottom of the slide, so I welcome you to have a look at it. There are lots of concepts, and we looked at the topic of the integration in great details. But in order to not to get tangled into the all the components, we looked at the bigger picture and at the marketplaces, because ultimately it is the business models and it is the services that are drivers of whatever is happening at the edge, and all of the components, such as the hardware, such as the connectivity, such as digital infrastructures, and the electricity infrastructures. So what are the forces, and very briefly here, that are shaping up this integration and the importance? So we've identified the so-called 4 forces. So it's the European market design that is ongoing. Why it is relevant? It is relevant because the market rules and the ways to participate in these marketplaces are of relevance. There is also ongoing smart sector integration efforts, which make the whole approach even more complicated because we're not talking about only electricity, although it's playing the central role, but also other energy vectors. And as I mentioned, so marketplaces and data spaces are shaping as we speak. And within the marketplaces, we have a variety of the platforms, digital platforms. I think you might have heard some of the presentations today on the data spaces, so that also fits in. What you see on the screen is we don't think that the revolution, IoT revolution, is immediate. It happens in stages, so that's why we devised the marketplaces in the 4 stages of development, allocated the related technologies, and identified the related challenges. But Laurent, to answer your question, and I will not go over all the bullets that you see over here, so that will be left for future looking at, but I just would like to mention at least 4 that I think are the most important ones. So the market signals for the participation of consumers to adapt and engage with the innovations, with the new technologies and the new models, I think is one of the enablers. The second one worth mentioning is the user experiences and facilitation of the new solutions, integration of the new solutions into the energy communities and the prosumers and consumers. Trust cannot be underestimated, which is under fostering an innovative, friendly culture. And also participation of the public sector, but also not only participation, but also spearheading a number of facilitating energy communities potentially, and citizens and prosumers participation. So in terms of the technologies, we know that is not the major challenge. It is ongoing challenge, and we're not going to focus on it right now. And governance of the platforms and the rules for participation in the platforms cannot be underestimated. And I would like to leave with the challenge, because in addition to the topics mentioned, the other one is which architectures are adequate to make sure that we can enable these marketplaces. And this is more of a question than an answer, but I think we know which direction we are moving, and I leave it for the discussion. So I think we are ready for the reference model for exchanging data based on the smart transactions and shared governance. So I think that's where we're moving, and also another aspect worth mentioning is the data and services valorization that will be important for unlocking the future. I will stop here, and I think we can have further discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm going now to pass the floor to Michael, who is the head of a very important organization in Europe, who is coordinating all matters related to flexibility and demand response, so Smarten. So, Michael, we've heard from Natalie of the importance of the price signal, particularly. You refer to implicit demand response. So what's your view from that perspective? What are the data to be unlocked? What are the open source layers required to really bring flexibility into the system?
Thanks a lot, Laurent. I will indeed introduce Smarten as you said, as the European business organization integrating all consumer-driven solutions for the clean energy transition, and we put indeed consumers at the heart of our visions to enable indeed not just an on-site optimization of end users, that is the current and the previous focus of end users, but an interaction of end user with the systems in order to optimize not just on-site, but also the system to achieve indeed climate neutrality in the most cost-effective way, to increase indeed the system efficiency. In order to do that, end users needs to be able to be part into a digital ecosystem, how I like calling that. Hello, Mark. into a digital ecosystem which is made of different decentralized energy resources, different players, which are able to react to different signals, and these signals are real-time price signals, so implicit, but it can also be explicit incentives for the participation of different markets. And in order to participate, to react and act on the basis of these signals, they need to find a proper equilibrium. Achieving an equilibrium through the participation of end users to different marketplaces is essential. And indeed, I would like to share this slide. I don't know if you are indeed seeing that. End users indeed needs to be able to participate in different marketplaces at all levels, being that local through, for example, Transactive energy platforms, or also local energy communities, but also local flexibility markets opened by TSO, and then at higher levels, markets by TSO, for example, balancing, but also wholesale, like intraday and day ahead markets. All these marketplaces should be able to be connected in order to allow to maximize the value of flexibility services and boost prosumer business models. In order to achieve this reality, what do we need? Access, interoperability, and security. These are the essential key words for us. Access, what does it mean? Well, first of all, access to marketplaces. As Natalie was saying before, we have an electricity market design that needs to be implemented and also allow demand-side resources to actually participate to all existing markets, but also participate to new markets that are going to create, like, as I was mentioning before, local flexibility markets. Access to data access, data sharing. We had a really interesting presentation before on the Green Energy Hub. Well, this is going to be a possible evolution to access data, exchange data in order to enable the integration and the valorization of flexible assets. Access to real-time price signals, definitely, to allow a dynamic optimization of supply and demand, and also integrate retail and wholesale markets and optimize dynamically the use of all energy assets. Then we need, as I was saying, interoperability, horizontally and vertically. This is extremely important, and this is related to this connection of levels. An horizontal integration implies a TSO and DSO cooperation, and an horizontal one instead will be of the possibility of different markets, for example, balancing markets by TSO to communicate and share resources in a cooperative way. It's also cross-border, which is an important evolution, and interoperability in that sense is extremely important. And then security, which has, of course, different connotation, is also cybersecurity, security of also transaction, cybersecurity of for data, and all these elements of this digital ecosystem will enable an automation of the possibility of end users to actively participate to the clean energy systems. And this is going to be extremely important to allow consumer acceptance and consumer participation that will simplify the participation of all end users to the clean energy transition. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Michael. Very clear. So multi-market interface, interoperability, security, very complementary, I think, to what we heard from Natalie. So we are very happy to have as well today Mark with us, who is really the master coordinator of everything happening on the European Commission side when it comes to digital, and who also has a deep pocket on the Horizon Europe. So Mark, we are very interested to hear from you what you see coming in the next step of the digital strategy and how you see open source into your next initiative.
Yeah, thank you, Laurent. And hello, Michael, Natalie, and everybody else who is listening. Pleasure to be here. Sorry for joining a bit late. Still sometimes you have this issue of getting through the right browser or the right link to actually join the session. But I heard most of what Natalie said, and then of course also what Michael said. And let's say I don't think we have to discuss much in terms of what the end goal is. Because I think there we all agree. I think from what I heard, from what Michael said and what Natalie said, we are fully in agreement with that, and we want to achieve that. The question is, I think, very much how. Maybe as a way of introducing where we stand, and as you said, Laurent, what is happening, I would like to mention three issues. First of all, a little bit in terms of where we come from. I think the clean energy package was mentioned. That is a cornerstone of the framework that we have and that we need to implement in order to make these flexibility markets happen that benefit consumers, that brings, let's say, the prosumer or demand response flexibility to the network, and that needs to be used by the network operators. And that is a change in approach. That is, I think, quite a revolution in approach, actually, that we established with the clean energy package as a principle. And network operators need to use all the assets that are connected to the grid in order to manage the grid. And I think the reason for that is very simple: to keep the cost down, because there is a lot of flexibility in many distributed places, but we need to be able to tap into it. So if we want to keep the cost down, and we also have to make the access of all those flexible assets to the market very, very easy. And that, I think, has two dimensions that you already mentioned. On the one hand, making the market work. So what are the type of products that the network operators look for in the right size, with the right call time, so to say, to activate them. And here we have made big and important steps, in particular in balancing. And with the balancing network code, it is now possible for much smaller assets to access that market. And as a consequence, we see local storage, PV panels, batteries in cars to be able to participate in the balancing market that used to be exclusively for big gas-fired turbines. And I think that's a big step forward. But it's only one step, and there is, of course, a lot still to gain in congestion management, in particular at the local level. And when we start tapping into that market, it needs to be coordinated with the balancing market, because we don't want people to sell the same thing twice at the same time. And so I think there is a big importance, as Michael said, for the network operators to cooperate. And what we also need to make sure is that not every city or every network operator, local network operator, so to say, but even the TSO, makes its own system, because then for a company like Michael's, or Michael's members, I should say, it's going to be much too difficult to join that market. And then we don't end up with making this market cheap and a good alternative to more expensive investments in grids or network operators investing in some type of dedicated flexibility for the grid. We need to make it easily accessible, and that means that it needs to be predictable, transparent from the point of view of how a network operator or how network operators together operate this market. And secondly, the whole data layer behind it. So that's where the open source comes in, making sure that we also meet the objective of a digital single market, because this is not just about energy, it's also about innovating, about allowing the new technology companies to participate in Europe's data-driven services market, and energy can be a big part of it. And when we do that, it can actually contribute big time to the to, let's say, a new economy and new type of services and innovation and competitiveness of both the digital sector as well as the energy sector. So I think the clean energy package is a big first step, but we need to still implement some steps. And one of the things we're looking at the moment is how do we need to organize those flexibility markets further than just balancing. And that is something we're closely looking at together with the network operators to see how to go about it. We've been, second point, you mentioned the deep pockets, half of the member states, obviously. And we've been spending a lot of money on trying to see how this works, because this clean energy package requirement is an innovative approach. It's been based on the fact that we know that it works based on many of the projects that we finance. And now we're looking at to see how we can increase the scale. How can we make sure that, as mentioned, that this is not each network operator designing its own thing, but how do we make all these different systems linked? And this is something we've been gradually increasing the scale of those pilots and asking also different pilots to cooperate, to allow data exchange among them, so that, let's say, when one of Michael's members want to enter the market, he doesn't need to have, let's say, 6,500 software systems for every network operator he wants to interact with. And so that is what we've been progressively doing. Now, of course, next big thing is coming is Horizon Europe. We hope to publish the work program somewhere in May. And there we are going to change the approach a little bit, because we're no longer going to focus on bigger and bigger pilots, because I think we've achieved what we could do with Horizon Europe. But we want to focus really on the data spaces behind it and making them mutually compatible. So spreading thus use of data spaces, and also asking individual projects from the start to make sure that what they do in one data space is compatible with the other. And I think that is a big step to, let's say, the open approach and the interoperable approach that you also are asking for. And lastly, I mentioned this a little bit, of course, this is in some way technical, but on the other hand, it's also something that's crucial for this commission, because it is part of the Green Deal and it's part of Europe Fit for the Digital Age. Our Vice President Vestager is adamant about a digital single market for services, for data to float freely across the EU. So we've come out with a Data Governance Act proposal that says that these are the principles and that need to be filled in for individual sectors and data spaces. And I think this is something that we are looking at the moment. The coming year will be basically, we will dedicate our attention, in my unit I'm saying, to figuring out how do we set up such an energy data space, in particular to enable flexibility markets. So that, and of course, with the help of Horizon 2020 project, with the help of a Horizon Europe support for an interoperability community, that is very important, with the help of Bridge, where many of the projects cooperate. But by next year, this time, I hope that we have come up with very concrete steps to actually create such a data space, and not just any data space for any data, but really for the support of a flexibility market. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks, Mark. Very, very clear, and congratulations to your team for all the work which you have done. I'm very convinced the clean energy package is really a benchmark in the world when it comes to climate change mitigation, and you continue to push, and this is really to the benefit of our industries. Maybe I'm going to provide a few inputs from my side. I only have 2 slides. The first one is kind of a summary. If we ask today to a consumer what he would like to have as an information and a type of interaction, is really to something which is data about his security of supply, being able to select his tariff and understand his tariff. I think this is absolutely crucial today. Bills are very complex, and we need to simplify this. Having data about climate change, being part of the climate change, is my electron green or not? And of course, leverage all the IoT which is at the interface, and facilitate integration of all that together. If we look at the back side of the scene, and we heard a lot today about how to re-architect EMS, DMS in the TSO and DSO world, how to integrate with microgrid at the edge, and so on. We are in a play of platform which is really complex, and really the key here is how to agree on open standard APIs interface, reusing as much open source layers between them, and being able to interact real time. I think the real time element is absolutely crucial. Renewables introduction in the system drives a lot of real-time interaction across system. I think we heard it from the 4 of you today. And I would really advocate that we are not only looking at theoretical reference architecture, I would say, to interconnect daily data, monthly data. We need to be able to activate device DER at the interface in a plug-and-play API principle. So that would really be my input into this. So maybe I see the time is going through. We have a question from Nicolo, which we can try to respond to. Is how do you see basically these big regulation coming bottom up, top down from TSOs, DSOs, and these notion of communities and grid edge interaction, peer to peer? We heard today. How do we see we can combine the two? Is this going to match together? Is this going at some stage to diverge?
I can start saying that they should be able to communicate to allow demand stability to values to be valorized. We need to have the possibility of activating this flexibility in all different markets, because this will boost prosumer business models. We are lacking commercial and market frameworks, and if we are having different marketplaces that are able to communicate while avoiding double activation, because these will create discrepancies which will create a remarkable problems for end users and for the systems, then we have found the solution both for end users and for the system.
Yes, very
Natalie,
quickly. If we have the frameworks that Michael mentioned, then we need the investments in the digital infrastructures. All three components of the digital infrastructures, the devices, the networks to enhance this real-time capacities and capabilities, and as well as the platforms and the models to participate in the platforms. So that's why in our latest work, we emphasize the need of the allocation of the RRF, resilience and recovery funding into the larger rollouts to enable actually beyond the pilots in order to scale up.
Okay, Mark? Any specific view, particularly on how to align these two model, bottom up, top down?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to responding to wholesale market price signals, let's say with the rollout of smart meters, that should progressively become possible. I think that is actually a matter of. Then, of course, maybe it still needs some push in some markets, because we know that not all markets have real retail competition. But that's actually a bigger issue that we're trying to solve with long-standing dialogues with some member states. But let's say in the countries where there is a retail market competition, you see these formulas of flexible pricing emerging, where we absolutely need a, so to say, as Nicolo calls it, a top-down or centralized step is for the network operators to give a value to flexibility for balancing or for congestion management. And as soon as network operators start communicating what they need and where, and that needs to be, of course, a platform or a set of mutually communicating platforms, so to say, where the network operators communicate to the market. And then I would expect, companies like those Michael's members, what Natalie represents, what you represent, Laurent, to be starting building platforms and services on top of that, where you can combine data from all different sources or combine it with all different things. But the absolute first step needs to be a network operator that communicates what it needs and when, in a way, like we said, that has some similarity across different systems. And that also, in terms of data interoperability requirements, has a basic common standard for everybody to chip into it early. But I think that's absolutely needed. And of course, in the transition, we may want to invest and support these prosumer communities to actually be able to gather their flexibility and bring it to a market, and to support the emergence of the business models. But and we're doing that with the OneNet project, where we have asked also consumer projects to cooperate with it to test that it can actually work from a consumer perspective. But we also see quite some private initiatives, in particular driven by e-mobility, where you already see this emerging. And from our point of view, when it can work for e-mobility, it can work for the smallest fridge. It's just that you don't build the bridge for one cyclist a day, but when it's there, the cyclist can also use it. And I think that's the case here as well. So we need this, let's say, this top-down intervention where I think we need a coordinated action from the EU, like we've done with balancing in the network code, to make sure that that the basic set is there. We may want to help parties in the transition, but in the end, I see a kind of thriving market where maybe at some point the network operators may kind of withdraw a little bit again because the market has been taking up initiatives, but we need them to make the first step.
Yeah, from my side, just to conclude, maybe I must say I fully agree on the fact that these models are not opposed against each other. They actually can integrate rather well together. And if we compare with what we heard over the last few hours in the IT sector, we heard a lot about layered architecture, layered optimization, grid edge IoT. And actually, this integration of layers in the IT space is exactly the same as what we see as a need into the business and regulatory space. So I think if we align the two well, that can work. We also heard today very interesting input on how to foster adoption of standards. Mark, this is for you. I know that's one of your headache on the table. We heard an example on how the open community, I would say, open standard environment can work with the open source community in helping each other to evangelize, educate developers to these new APIs and so on. And I'm sure the Linux Foundation for Energy is going to be an interesting vehicle from that perspective moving forward into your new data space environment. So I think we are at the end here. I very much enjoyed this interaction. Thank you, Natalie, Michael, and Mark for your input. And I think we are supposed to
Thanks
leave
a lot.
now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. And also thanks to the Linux Foundation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.